In the esteemed halls of the Galactic Institute of Advanced Military Studies, GMS, where even the drinking fountains necessitated 3 distinct types of environmental suits and a signed liability waiver, Professor Zix 427 Beta adjusted his 7th century appendage and braced himself to disappoint yet another class of eager students. Well, eager was perhaps too eccentric a term, considering that 30% of his students performed photosynthesis and another 15% existed primarily in quantum superposition. Still, the sentiment remained the same. They all arrived with the same misguided enthusiasm about studying the most catastrophic weapons in galactic history. The lecture hall itself was a marvel of universal accommodation, featuring seating arrangements tailored for everything from gaseous entities to silicon-based life forms. There was even a small anti-gravity section for species that had the unfortunate tendency to explode upon contact with furniture. The room hummed with the distinct chatter of young minds poised to learn just how profoundly mistaken they were about everything. Settle down, settle down. Professor Zix 427 Beta vibrated at the standard teaching frequency. And yes, that includes you, Mr. Kurz. I can see you're still oscillating between dimensions. Pick one and stick with it for the duration of class, please. The professor's tendrils waved over the holographic display, bringing up the course title, Advanced Theoretical Weaponry. From big bangs to bigger mistakes beneath it in smaller text. No actual weapons allowed in class. This means you, hydrogen-based life forms. Now, the professor continued, his chromatophores shifting to the formal teaching pattern, we are about to commence our annual research project on the deadliest weapons in known space. And before anyone asks, no, the Tikti consciousness splitter does not count. We all remember last year's incident with the temporary universe implosion, a disappointed tentacle lowered in the back row. This year, we're taking a different approach. Instead of focusing on the usual suspects, planet crackers, star eaters, reality warpers, we're going to analyze weapons from, he paused for dramatic effect, his secondary breathing sacs inflating slightly, pre-FTL civilizations, The collective groan that swept through the classroom transcended species barriers. Someone in the crystalline section actually cracked in disappointment. Yes, I know. How primitive, how mundane. But I assure you, there are surprises to be found in studying less advanced civilizations. Each of you will be assigned a species to research, and this year, we have a special treat. The professor's chromatophores twinkled mischievously. We actually have a representative from one of these civilizations in our class. All sensory organs turned toward the back corner, where a single human student sat, attempting to look both proud and inconspicuous. A uniquely human combination that never quite worked. The professor's upper eye stalk glimmered with what might have been amusement. Let's see what we can learn from our galactic neighbors, shall we? Even the simple ones sometimes have the most fascinating ways of destroying things. Little did Professor Zix 427 Beta know just how fascinating things were about to become. The assignment distribution process proceeded with all the grace of a gelatinous collective attempting to use chopsticks. Professor Zix 427 Beta's primary appendage moved across his quantum tablet, randomly assigning civilizations to students while doing his best to avoid any potential diplomatic catastrophes. Xylophone 9, he called, addressing a crystalline being whose natural resonance made everyone's teeth ache, even species that lacked teeth. You'll be researching the Andromeda Spiral's defunct Type 2 civilization. Try not to get too excited. We all remember what happened when you reached your natural frequency during midterms. The crystalline entity dimmed slightly in acknowledgement, likely recalling the 3-week cleanup operation that had followed. Blorp the Magnificent, the professor continued, addressing a mass of shifting purple goo. You have the Crab Nebula's ancient warrior race. And before you ask, no, they weren't actual crabs. That's just sloppy translation work from our linguistics department. The professor continued down the list, assigning increasingly obscure civilizations to his students. The quantum triplets, who shared a single consciousness across 3 bodies, were given the Silicon Syndicate, A photosynthetic cloud of sentient spores was tasked with researching the mechanical empire of Sector 7. And then, the professor's voice modulator shifted to what passed for amusement in his species. For our human student, the class's attention once again swiveled to the back corner. The human, who had been doodling on their note-taking device, a charmingly primitive habit that fascinated the more evolved species, perked up. "You'll be researching Earth." A moment of silence fell over the classroom, broken only by the soft hum of the antimatter containment field around the snack dispenser. "But, Professor," vibrated a student composed of sentient electromagnetic waves, "isn't that a conflict of interest? They're obviously going to be biased about their own species' weapons." On the contrary, the professor's chromatophores shifted to the smug academic pattern. Who better to explain a species' deadliest weapons than one of their own? Besides, empirical evidence suggests that humans are almost pathologically honest about their shortcomings. The human student sat up straighter, wearing that peculiar expression unique to their kind, the one that suggested they couldn't decide whether to be flattered or insulted. "Now," the professor continued, "you'll each have exactly 3 standard cycles to prepare your presentations. Remember the guidelines. Focus on the single deadliest weapon developed by your assigned civilization. And please, try to be more original than last semester. If I have to sit through another presentation about antimatter bombs, I'm going to molt early." Excitement rippled through the class as students accessed the Galactic Historical Database through their neural interfaces, or, in the case of non-neural species, through their chosen method of information absorption. "One final note," the professor added, his warning glance slightly engorged. "This is an academic exercise. Any attempts to recreate the weapons you research will result in immediate failure of the course and possible temporal imprisonment." His gaze lingered on a multidimensional being in the front row. "I'm looking at you, Dave." Dave shifted uncomfortably. It had taken the maintenance staff 3 decades to clean up after his last practical experiment. As the class dispersed, the professor noticed the human lingering behind, wearing what appeared to be a knowing smile. Something about that expression made his risk assessment glands tingle. He dismissed it as paranoia. After all, what could one pre-FTL species possibly have to smile about when it came to weapons of mass destruction? He was about to find out just how wrong that assumption was. Over the next 3 cycles, the GMS library witnessed research frenzies typically reserved for impending extinction events. Students buried themselves in historical records, weapon schematics, and battle reports, while the library's AI desperately tried to prevent anyone from accidentally downloading blueprints for actual doomsday devices. The quantum triplets had already caused 3 temporal paradoxes trying to comprehend the Silicon Syndicate's time displacement bombs. Xylophone 9 shattered 3 data crystals in excitement upon discovering planet-splitting energy beams. Meanwhile, the human students' research methods were causing quite a stir. Instead of diving into weapon schematics like everyone else, they spent an alarming amount of time studying seemingly irrelevant subjects, cooking techniques, sports equipment, agricultural tools. The professor had no idea just how much trouble was brewing, and something called corporate management strategies. Most inefficient, common in a hive mind of microscopic organisms sharing an environmental suit. How does one expect to understand destructive capability without studying destruction? The human just smiled and continued reading about the history of the spork. The library's AI, which had been monitoring everyone's research patterns, mostly to prevent another incident like Dave's attempted reconstruction of a cosmic string weapon, found itself increasingly puzzled by the human's approach. It had flagged exactly 0 weapon schematics in their search history, which had to be some kind of record for this assignment. Professor Zix 427 Beta, making his routine checks on student progress, paused at the human study station. His confusion gland swelled noticeably as he observed their research materials. "I couldn't help but notice," he vibrated cautiously, "that you seem to be spending an inordinate amount of time studying kitchen utensils." The human looked up from a fascinating article about the history of the butter knife. "Oh yes, Professor. Just trying to be thorough." "Thorough about what exactly?" The assignment is about weapons, not culinary history. Everything's connected, Professor. The human replied with that unsettling smile that seemed to be their default expression. Sometimes the deadliest weapons don't look like weapons at all. The professor's risk assessment glands began tingling again. He made a mental note to double-check the warranty on his tenure insurance. As the research phase drew to a close, the other students had compiled impressive presentations about various civilization-ending devices. The photosynthetic spores had created a detailed analysis of automated warfare systems. The electromagnetic wave being had produced a comprehensive study of dark matter manipulation. Yet the humans' research continued to baffle everyone. They had moved on from kitchen utensils to studying the history of peaceful technological innovations, occasionally chuckling to themselves while taking notes. Several of their classmates had started a betting pool about whether they had completely misunderstood the assignment or were planning something unprecedented. The library AI, after analyzing the humans' research pattern for the 100th time, finally gave up trying to predict their conclusion. However, it did note a curious pattern. Everything the human had studied shared one common theme. They were all tools that could be used for multiple purposes. On the final day before presentations were due, the human finally closed their last research file and sat back with an expression that somehow managed to convey both satisfaction and mischief. Another uniquely human combination that made several nearby silicon-based life forms deeply uncomfortable. Finished? Asked Bleer the Magnificent, who had been watching with increasing confusion. "Oh, yes," replied the human. "I think I found exactly what I was looking for, but you haven't accessed a single weapons database." The human gathered their research materials, that knowing smile still playing across their face. "Sometimes," they said, "the deadliest weapons aren't in weapons databases at all." As they left the library, several students would later swear they heard the human humming something that sounded suspiciously like the Circle of Life from an ancient Earth entertainment program. Nobody knew quite what to make of that, but everyone agreed it couldn't be a good sign. The day of presentations arrived with all the subtle dread of a supernova in a glitter factory. The lecture hall buzzed with nervous energy as students prepared their holocubes and quantum displays. Professor Zix 427 Beta's threat glands were working overtime, anticipating the usual array of potentially catastrophic technical difficulties. Xylophone 9 went first, presenting their findings on the Andromedan matter conversion bombs. They managed to get through most of it before their excitement caused them to accidentally shatter the holographic projector. The maintenance droids, having anticipated this, had a replacement ready before the pieces hit the ground. The quantum triplets delivered their presentation simultaneously from 3 different temporal perspectives, which was technically against the rules but too interesting to stop. Their analysis of Silicon Syndicate weapons included a fascinating section on quantum-entangled explosives that only detonated when nobody was looking at them. Bleer the Magnificent oozed their way through an impressive breakdown of biological warfare, occasionally splitting into smaller blobs for dramatic effect. Their detailed explanation of genetic targeting viruses made several organic students deeply uncomfortable, and one photosynthetic being briefly considered becoming mineral-based. Dave's presentation on cosmic string weapons was cut short when they accidentally began creating a miniature universe in the classroom. The professor had to remind them that visual aids shouldn't threaten the fabric of reality. As each student finished, a pattern emerged. Every presentation focused on increasingly dramatic methods of destruction: antimatter cascades, artificial black holes, entropy accelerators. The photosynthetic spores even managed to make self-replicating nanobots sound boring through sheer technical detail. Finally, it was a human's turn. The class watched with a mixture of curiosity and concern as the human walked to the front, carrying nothing but a small data tablet. No holocube, no quantum displays, not even a single reality-bending visual aid. My research, they began with that peculiar human expression that suggested they knew something nobody else did. Focus on finding Earth's deadliest weapon. I think you'll find the results interesting. Professor Zick's 427 beta's warning glands began pulsing. Something about the human's tone made his survival instincts kick in. After careful study of Earth's history, the human continued, I've concluded that our deadliest weapon isn't a device, a chemical, or even a methodology. It's something far more fundamental. Our ability to transform anything into a weapon. A confused murmur rippled through the classroom. Someone in the back asked if they could blow up reality with it. Let me explain, the human said, pulling up their first slide. Throughout history, humans have demonstrated an unparalleled talent for weaponizing literally anything we encounter. We turn pointy sticks into spears, rocks into bullets, atoms into bombs. But that's just the obvious stuff. The human lecturer flicked to the next slide, displaying various ordinary objects. We weaponize mathematics into encryption. We weaponize sound into sonic attacks. We even weaponize language itself into propaganda. We turn agriculture into economic warfare, economics into financial weapons, and transform social interaction into psychological warfare. The class watched in growing horror as the human cataloged how their species had historically transformed everyday items and concepts into tools of destruction. Several students began nervously eyeing their own equipment, wondering if humans could weaponize them too. But here's the truly terrifying part, the human continued, their smile widening slightly. We don't just weaponize things. We weaponize ideas, concepts, abstract thoughts. We can turn philosophy into a weapon, turn peace itself into a strategic tool, transform literal kindness into a method of psychological manipulation. Professor Zick's 427 beta's risk assessment glands were working so hard they were approaching critical mass. The deadliest weapon in Earth's history isn't any single invention. It's our capacity to see the weapon potential in everything. Give a human a flower, they might make perfume or poison. Give them a stick, they'll make a walking aid or a club. Give them absolutely anything, and they'll find a way to help or harm with it. The human paused for effect, looking around the now silent classroom. Our deadliest weapon is our creativity combined with our pattern recognition abilities and our capability to repurpose literally anything. We're basically weaponized adaptability. A crystalline being in the front row actually cracked from stress. To demonstrate, the human said cheerfully, I prepared a small list of how this very classroom could be transformed into weapons using only the items currently present. What followed was 5 minutes of the most terrifying improvised warfare brainstorming the galaxy had ever witnessed. By the end, 3 students had filed for species-wide trauma counseling. Dave had sworn off weaponry forever, and the classroom's AI had initiated emergency lockdown protocols, despite not having that feature installed. In conclusion, the human finished, seemingly oblivious to the existential crisis they had triggered. Earth's deadliest weapon is simply our ability to turn anything and everything into a weapon. Thank you for your attention. Any questions? The silence that followed was so profound that several sound-based life forms briefly ceased to exist. Professor Zick's 427 beta's threat glands had completely seized up. In all his centuries of teaching, he had never encountered a presentation that managed to make every other doomsday weapon seem quaint by comparison. Finally, a brave photosynthetic cloud raised a pseudopod. Does this mean humans can weaponize questions? The human smile widened just a fraction. What do you think this presentation was? The class collectively decided that was enough questions for one day. The aftermath of the human presentation hit the Galactic Institute like a quantum uncertainty principle having an existential crisis. The initial shock rippled to the various species in fascinatingly diverse ways. The silicon-based life forms began a rapid crystallization process born of pure anxiety. Their usually geometric thought patterns fractured into chaotic arrays as they processed the implications of a species that could weaponize literally anything. Several of them had to be carefully reassembled by the medical staff. The quantum triplets, for the first time in their shared existence, developed 3 slightly different opinions on the matter. This unprecedented break in their quantum harmony caused such distress that the space-time continuum around them began to hiccup. Blorp the Magnificent had divided into several smaller worried blorps, each one contemplating a different horrifying aspect of human adaptability. One particularly stressed blorp had started stress-absorbing nearby furniture. Professor Zix, for 27 Beta, found himself in the unique position of having to file both a commendation for exceptional research and a hazard warning to the Galactic Security Council. His various glands were sending such conflicting signals that his chromatophores had settled into a previously undocumented pattern, best described as academically terrified. Notification systems across campus began pinging with unprecedented frequency as students frantically sent messages to their home worlds. The library AI reported a 3,000% increase in searches for human adaptation rates, and can humans weaponize evolution itself? An emergency faculty meeting was hastily convened in the quantum probability chamber, where the professors could exist in a state of both addressing and avoiding the issue simultaneously. The dean, a being of pure energy contained within a specially designed suit, flickered with agitation. "Do you mean to tell me," the dean's voice crackled through their containment field, "that we've been allowing a species of weaponized adaptability specialists to attend our institution?" In retrospect, Professor Zix, for 27 Beta, admitted, his warning glands still working overtime. "Perhaps we should have been more concerned when they turned the cafeteria food synthesis unit into a crude but effective propulsion system last semester. They claimed it was for a food fight, which we now realize may have been a military exercise in disguise." The faculty collectively shuddered, suddenly remembering dozens of similar innocent incidents. The time a human student had repurposed a quantum eraser for data storage, the incident with the modified gravity plates in the gym, the mysterious disappearance of all the antimatter from the physics lab, which had been returned with a note saying, "Just checking something." Meanwhile, in the student commons, the humans' classmates were dealing with their own realizations. Everything around them, every piece of furniture, every device, every concept and theory they learned, suddenly seemed to hold hidden potential for weaponization. Dave, still traumatized from the presentation, had started labeling everything in their vicinity with potential human weapon warnings. They'd gotten through half the common room before running out of labels and resorting to using their own molecular structure to create more. The photosynthetic spores had gathered in a corner, attempting to photosynthesize their anxiety away. Their usually bright glow had dimmed to a worried flicker as they contemplated how humans might weaponize photosynthesis itself. Xylophone 9 was experiencing such cognitive dissonance that their crystalline structure had started playing what sounded suspiciously like early Earth jazz, a phenomenon that both fascinated and terrified the xenomusicology department. The human students, seemingly unaware of the existential crisis they had triggered, sat calmly in the midst of this chaos, sipping something they called coffee, which several students now suspected might be a psychological warfare agent, given how it seemed to make humans even more dangerously creative. As the day progressed, the revelation continued to send shockwaves through the academic community. The xenopsychology department had gone into emergency session, attempting to understand how a species could evolve such a terrifying combination of creativity and adaptability. The xenoengineering faculty were reviewing every human student's previous projects with newfound concern. And somewhere in the chaos, as faculty members rushed to update safety protocols and students looked at their surroundings with new eyes, the humans sat back and watched it all unfold with that same knowing smile. They pulled out their data tablet and began taking notes, causing several nearby students to flee in terror.